My own mother, the woman who carried me in her womb, who braided my hair every Sunday morning before church, who called me her precious Adaeze, sat across from my husband's family and told them I could never give their son a child. She said it with a straight face. She said it calmly. She said it with the kind of confidence that only comes from someone who had rehearsed those words many, many times. And if that wasn't enough to make your blood run cold, she did it so that my younger sister could step in and take my place. If you are new here, subscribe and hit that bell because the stories I tell on this channel, they will shake you to your core. Now stay with me because this one gets darker before it gets better. Her name was Adaeze Okonkwo, and she was 26 years old when she married Chukwuemeka Eze, Emeka as everyone called him, in a ceremony that stretched over 3 days and filled the entire compound of his family's home in Enugu State. It was the kind of wedding people still talk about years later, the kind with aunties who arrived in matching asoebi fabric so bright it hurt to look at them directly. The kind where the youngest children fell asleep on laps because the celebration refused to end. Adaeze was beautiful in a way that didn't announce itself. She didn't walk into rooms expecting people to stare. She walked into rooms the way sunlight enters, quietly, completely, until you realize everything looks different with her there. She had studied accounting at the university in Nsukka. She was disciplined, soft-spoken, and possessed of the particular kind of intelligence that doesn't need to perform itself for anyone. Emeka had seen her at a mutual friend's graduation party. He told his mother that same evening that he had found the woman he would marry. His mother, Mama Eze, a sturdy, sharp-eyed woman named Ngozi, who ruled her household like a general rules a battalion, said, "Don't be foolish, Emeka. You only just saw her." But Emeka had smiled and said, "Mama, I know what I know." He wasn't wrong. Within 8 months, he had visited Adaeze's family home with wine and kola nut. Within 14 months, they were husband and wife. And for the first 2 years, everything was the way they had dreamed it would be. Emeka worked as a civil engineer with a firm in Enugu. Adaeze managed the accounts of a mid-sized trading company. They lived in a modest but clean house in a quiet street. They cooked together on Sundays. They argued about small things and made up before morning. They built what young people called a real home. There was only one shadow. The pregnancy that everyone expected had not come. In the beginning, no one said anything openly. Mama Eze would visit and her eyes would drift to Adaeze's stomach with the subtlety of someone who had never learned what subtlety was. Adaeze's own aunties would whisper behind her during family gatherings. Emeka's sisters would ask questions that dressed themselves as concern but carried an edge underneath. "Are you taking care of yourself well, Adaeze? Sometimes stress can delay these things, you know. Have you tried going to the village woman? She helped my friend's sister." Adaeze bore it all quietly. Quietly was the only way she knew how to bear anything. What nobody outside their bedroom walls knew was that Adaeze and Emeka had already begun seeing a doctor. A good doctor at a proper hospital in the city. The result had come back with a finding that required patience, not panic, a manageable hormonal imbalance that a specialist said could be treated. The doctor was optimistic. He used words like absolutely possible and just a matter of time. Emeka held Adaeze's hand through every appointment. He told her he wasn't going anywhere. He meant it. So, when month after month passed without news, they went despairing in secret. They were being patient in private. That was the difference. They had a plan. They were working the plan. What they didn't know, what Adaeze could never have imagined in her worst nightmare, was that someone else was working a very different plan. Adaeze's mother was named Uluaku. She was a woman of 54,
a market trader who had raised 4 children largely on her own after Adaeze's father died when Adaeze was only 11. People in their community called Uluaku a strong woman, and she was, but strength without wisdom can become a dangerous thing. Uluaku had always had favorites among her children, in the way that some parents do while swearing to everyone, including themselves, that they don't. Her favorite was her third daughter, Obiagili, Obi as the family called her. Obi was 23. She was louder than Adaeze, more daring, and possessed of a certain arresting beauty that turned heads immediately. She had not gone as far in school as Adaeze. She had started 3 different business ventures, each one collapsing within months, each one funded in part by money quietly provided by Uluaku. When Adaeze got married, something had shifted in Obi. A restlessness, an ambition that had found a specific, terrible target. She wanted what her sister had. Not a man, not a marriage. She wanted Emeka specifically. She had danced at her sister's wedding and smiled at Emeka throughout and told herself that her sister didn't deserve someone that good. She had watched their house get built and their life take shape, and the ugly seed inside her had grown roots. Obi had confided this to her mother. Not in the way a daughter confesses something she's ashamed of, but in the way Obi did everything, which was boldly, with the assumption that she would be agreed with. "Mama," she had said one afternoon when they were shelling beans in the back of the house, "Adaeze doesn't appreciate what she has." Uluaku had looked at her. "Emeka is a good man, a serious man. He deserves a woman who can give him children. What is my sister doing about this situation? 2 years and nothing." Uluaku had been quiet for a long time. "Obi," she had said finally, "don't enter where you have not been called." But she hadn't said it with force. She said it the way you say something you don't mean, out of obligation to the words, not out of conviction in them. And Obi had heard the difference, because Obi always heard the difference. The weeks that followed were in negotiation that was never spoken aloud. Obi planted seeds in her mother's mind like a farmer in dry season, patiently, methodically, trusting the rain to come. She would mention Emeka casually. She would speak about Adaeze with a kind of theatrical concern that really was envy wearing a mask. She would talk about what a shame it was, what a waste, how Emeka's family was suffering in silence. And Uluaku, who loved Obi with a love that had no sensible boundaries, began to turn. By the time the plan had formed completely, it had formed so gradually that Uluaku had almost convinced herself it was her own idea, that she was doing it for everyone, for Emeka who needed a child, for Obi who needed a future, even in some twisted corner of her reasoning, for Adaeze, who would surely understand eventually that sometimes life required sacrifices. What Uluaku planned to do was go to Mama Eze, not to gossip, not to start trouble. She had framed it more nobly in her own mind than that. She was going to have a woman-to-woman conversation. She was going to share a truth, she told herself, though the truth she planned to share was a lie so precise and so poisonous that it would take years to fully undo. She was going to tell Mama Eze that Adaeze had been told by doctors that she could never have children. Not that there was a treatable condition being managed, not that they were working with a specialist and had every reason for hope. She was going to say the word barren, that old, crushing, devastating word, and she was going to say it had been confirmed, final, with no remedy possible.
And she was going to suggest, with the delicacy of a woman who has thought this through very carefully, that there was another option, that her younger daughter, Obiageli, was available, willing, and more than capable of giving the Eze family the grandchildren they had been waiting for. She did it on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Mama Eze received her in the parlor. They drank tea. The conversation began with pleasantries about the market, about the weather, about a cousin's son who had just returned from abroad. And then Uluaku set the fire. Now, before I continue, I need you to really understand what this moment meant, because it wasn't just a conversation between two women. It was a mother picking up a weapon and pointing it at her own child. And what made it so devastating was not just what Uluaku said, but how Mama Adaeze received it. Mama Adaeze was a woman who had been waiting for a grandchild with the particular anxiety of a woman who has tied her identity very closely to the continuation of her bloodline. She was not cruel by nature, but she was proud, and she was afraid of disappointment, and she had always harbored a quiet, unspoken concern about Adaeze's quietness, as if a woman's subdued personality was somehow connected to her fertility. When Uluaku told her that Adaeze had been confirmed barren, that the doctors had spoken, that there was nothing to be done, Mama Adaeze's face went through something complicated. Grief, then anger, then the particular hardening of a woman who has decided that emotion is a luxury she cannot afford. "You are telling me this as her mother?" she asked. "As her mother," Uluaku confirmed. "Because I care about your son. Because Emeka is a good man. Because some things are bigger than what we want." Mama Adaeze was quiet for a long time. "And your other daughter," she said finally. "Obiageli is a good girl. Healthy, strong. She cares about Emeka." The conversation that followed would later make Adaeze sick to her stomach when she eventually heard it recounted. Two women, sitting in a parlor, calmly discussing replacing her as though she were a broken household appliance that needed swapping out. No anger in the room, no drama, just two mothers making arrangements over cold tea as the afternoon light moved across the floor. Mama Adaeze said she would speak to her son. She did not say when, she did not say how, but the way she said it made Uluaku understand that the machine had been set in motion. Uluaku drove home that evening with her heart doing something she couldn't quite name. Not guilt, because she had wrapped the guilt in so many layers of justification it couldn't breathe anymore. Not excitement, because even she was not so far gone as to be excited. Something more like the hollow feeling of a person who has done something they cannot undo and is only now beginning to understand that fact. She said nothing to Adaeze that evening, when Adaeze called to check on her, the way Adaeze called every single day without fail. "How are you, Mama?" "I am fine, my daughter, I am fine." The first sign that something was wrong came 3 weeks later. Emeka had been quieter than usual. Not cold. Emeka was constitutionally incapable of coldness, but distracted. He came home from work and sat with his thoughts in a way he usually didn't. He looked at Adaeze sometimes with an expression she couldn't read, and she would ask him what was wrong, and he would smile and say nothing, in the voice of a man who is carrying something heavy, but has not decided yet whether to put it down. Then Mama Adaeze called and asked Emeka to come home alone for the weekend. Not come home with your wife, alone. Adaeze noticed. She didn't say anything. She kissed her husband at the door and told him to greet his mother, and watched his car disappear down the street with a feeling in the bottom of her chest that she refused to name. Emeka came back from that weekend different. Not in any way that a stranger would notice, but Adaeze was not a stranger. She had learnt her husband the way you learn the geography of a place you love. Every hill, every hollow, every shadow the light made at different hours. She noticed the way he hugged her slightly too long when he came through the door, the way a person holds on to something they are afraid of losing. She noticed the way he looked at her across the dinner table that Sunday night, with something in his eyes that looked dangerously close to grief. "Emeka," she said, setting down her fork, "talk to me." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't. Then he said, "My mother told me something." "About me?" He looked up. "About me," she repeated, and it was not a question. The conversation that followed was one of those conversations that reorders the furniture of a marriage forever. Nothing is the same arrangement afterward. Even if everything is ultimately restored, you will always remember the night the room looked different.
Emeka told her what her mother had told him. He told her with obvious pain, repeating only the facts and not his own reaction, because his own reaction was still forming. He told her that her mother had said Adaeze was barren, that this had been confirmed medically, and that her own mother had come to share this news out of concern for the family. He watched his wife's face as he spoke. What crossed Adaeze's face in that moment was not the look of a woman who had been exposed. It was not guilt or panic or the scrambling of someone whose lie has been found out. What crossed her face was something that took Emeka a moment to identify because he had never seen it there before in their years together. It was pure cold shock, followed immediately by something that looked very much like her heart breaking. Not breaking over what he had said about being barren, but breaking over who had said it. "My mother," she whispered. "Mama came and told your mother that." "Emeka, that I am barren," she said the word as though touching a wound. "She told your mother I am barren." "The doctors, what have the doctors said, Adaeze? Tell me the truth. Whatever it is, just tell me."
And Adaeze told him. She told him everything she and the doctor had discussed. She told him about the hormonal imbalance, treatable, being treated. She told him about the appointments they had attended together, the ones he already knew about, the doctor's reassurances, the specialist's optimism. She pulled out her phone and showed him the last message from the doctor, the one she had received just the previous month, saying they were making progress. Emeka stared at his phone for a long time. Then he set it down on the table. "Why?" he said quietly. Not accusingly, but as a man who genuinely needs an answer. "Would your mother go to my mother and say this?" And this was the moment. This was the question that cracked the whole picture open and let the real light in. Because Adaeze, who was sharp and quiet and had watched her sister her whole life, suddenly understood. She didn't say a word for a long moment. She looked at the table. She breathed. And then she said very carefully, "Emeka, has your mother mentioned Obiageli to you at all?" The look on her husband's face told her everything. Now I need you to pause right here with me, because we are at the moment in this story where everything turns. And if you have been watching quietly, not yet subscribed, please do that now. Because the stories on this channel are told for people who understand that real betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the ones who are supposed to love you most. Subscribe. I'll be here every week with stories that will stay with you. Emeka had indeed been told about Obiageli. His mother had mentioned her carefully, not as a proposal exactly, more as a suggestion wrapped in concern. She had framed it as the family wanting what was best for him, wanting him to be happy, wanting grandchildren before they were too old to hold them. She had said that Adaeze's own mother agreed this was the best path, that even Adaeze's family could see it was time for a change. He had not agreed to anything. He had gone home confused and grieving and unable to share that grief with his wife because he hadn't known what to say. But the seed had been planted, and he was a man surrounded on all sides by voices telling him something was wrong with his marriage, and the only voice that could correct the record, his wife's, had not yet spoken because she had not known the record was being written. That changed that night. What happened between Emeka and Adaeze in the hours that followed is not something that can be rushed through. They sat at that table and they talked past midnight and then moved to the sitting room and talked until the early morning hours. And what happened was not an argument, it was a reckoning, a real one between two people who loved each other and were discovering that love alone is not a shield against the things that families can do to a marriage from the outside. Adaeze cried. She was not a woman who cried easily, but that night she cried with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something beautiful and fragile through a crowd that keeps bumping into her, and she has finally put it down and allowed herself to feel how tired her arms are. Emeka held her. He did not let go. By the time morning came, two things had been decided. First, Emeka would call his mother and tell her clearly and without softness that no such conversation would ever happen again,
that his marriage was his marriage, that he had chosen Adaeze, and that choice was not up for community review. Second, Adaeze would go to her mother's house. Not to cry, not to beg, not to make a scene, to understand. She drove to Uloaku's house on a Saturday morning and she sat across from her mother in the same parlor where Adaeze learned to read, in the same chair where she had sat as a child watching her mother plait other women's hair for money to pay school fees. And she looked at her mother and said, "Tell me what you did and why you did it." Uloaku tried, at first, the approach of denial. She said she didn't know what had heard, that things had been misunderstood, that she had only been trying to help. Adaeze let her speak. She waited with the patience of a woman who had already processed her tears and had nothing left but the cold, clear need for truth. When Uloaku finished, Adaeze said, "Mama, I know what you said. Emeka's mother told me, and Emeka told me. Do not insult me by lying." The silence that followed was one of those silences that has weight. Uloaku began to cry. And here is where the story does something unexpected, because what Adaeze felt in that moment watching her mother cry was not satisfaction, it was not vindication. It was the particular agony of a person who realizes that understanding the betrayal does not make it hurt less, and that love and hatred can exist at the exact same moment in the exact same heart. Loved her mother. She had always loved her mother. She would probably always love her mother. And her mother had sat across from her mother-in-law and told a lie that could have destroyed her marriage and her life in order to clear a path for a sister who had never had to work for anything Adaeze had not first cleared the ground for. "Why Obi?" Adaeze asked when the silence had stretched long enough. Uloaku wiped her face. "Obi needs, why Obi and not me?" Uloaku looked up. "Tell me the truth, Mama. Have you always loved her more? Is that what this is?" What came out of Uloaku's mouth next was the most devastating thing she said that day. Not the lie she had told Mama Eze. That at least had the pathetic dignity of being motivated by misguided love for Obi. What came out now was the truth, small and ugly as a stone. "Adaeze, you have always been fine. You have always managed. Obi struggles. I worry about Obi." She said it the way people say terrible things without fully hearing herself. Adaeze looked at her for a long time. "Because I managed," she finally said, "I did not need protection. And because I did not need protection, it was safe to sacrifice me." Uloaku opened her mouth. "Don't," Adaeze said. "Quietly, no drama, just quiet."
What happened next set the whole community talking for months. Adaeze did not end her marriage. Emeka had made it more than clear that he had no interest in any other woman, that he considered what had been attempted an act of profound violation, and that his wife was his wife. When his mother called again, trying one more time to press the case for Obiajeli with the particular stubbornness of a woman who had committed to a plan, Emeka told her something that made Mama Eze go very quiet on the line. He said, "Mama, if you loved me, you would want my wife to be someone I chose. I chose Adaeze. I am still choosing her. And the next time someone brings Obi's name into my marriage, I will know that they do not love me. They love a version of my life that I don't want." Mama Eze did not call again about Obi. But the ripples of what had been set in motion did not simply calm on their own. The story had spread, in the way of all family stories, through a whisper here and a hushed conversation there, and Adaeze found herself walking through family gatherings aware that people knew, or thought they knew, some version of events. She saw in people's eyes the particular discomfort of those who had already decided how to feel about something before they understood what had actually happened. Some people sided with Uloaku, the way people will sometimes side with the person who told the lie simply because the liar cried first. Some said she was only trying to look after her daughter,
as if that excused any portion of it. Some blamed Adaeze for not being pregnant yet, the staggering audacity of blaming the victim for providing the ammunition. Obi, for her part, did something that nobody had predicted. She called Adaeze. It was a Thursday evening, and Adaeze was in her kitchen, and the phone rang, and it was her sister, and for a moment, Adaeze simply stared at the name on the screen. She answered. "Ada," Obi said. Her voice was strange, tight, like someone speaking through a throat that had been clenched. "I need to tell you something." Adaeze said nothing. She waited. "Obi did what she did because I told her to." The kitchen was very quiet. "I told her to," Obi repeated. "I told her about the baby situation. I pushed her. I kept telling her Emeka deserved better. And I kept pushing until she went and did it. I didn't tell her to say exactly what she said, but I knew what she would say. I knew what she would do. And I let it happen." Adaeze sat down on her kitchen stool. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Obi was quiet for so long that Adaeze thought she had gone. Then, "Because Emeka called me." "Emeka called you?" "He called and told me what happened. He said that you were in pain and that the person most responsible for that pain had not had the decency to acknowledge it. He said I should call you. He said if I had any part of a conscience left, I would call and tell you the truth." There it was, her husband, who had thought to reach for the piece of the puzzle she hadn't known to reach for. Adaeze pressed her fingers to her eyes. "Do you love him?" she asked her sister. Obi was quiet again. "I thought I did," she said finally. "I think I was jealous of everything you have, not just Emeka, your house, your education, even your peace. You always seemed so settled. I wanted to be settled. I thought if I could just get what you had." "What I have," Adaeze said carefully, "is not a thing that can be taken. It is a thing that has to be built." Obi did not respond. "You wanted what I had," Adaeze continued, "but you never asked yourself what it cost. The doctor's appointments, the months of worry, the nights I cried alone in the bathroom so Emeka wouldn't hear, the family questions I smiled through. You saw the surface and decided you deserved it more than I did. And Mama agreed with you because I have always been the child who was fine." Obi was crying now. Adaeze could hear it. She did not move to comfort her. "I am not going to pretend I forgive you today. I don't. What you and Mama tried to do to my life, I am not small enough to dress that up. But I also know that hating you will not grow my child. It will not strengthen my marriage. It will not build one single thing that I need to build. So I am going to put this call down, and someday, not today, and I cannot tell you when, I am going to decide whether I want a sister or not." She ended the call. She sat in her kitchen for a long time. Outside, the evening was coming in with that particular Nigerian dusk quality of warm light that makes everything look briefly, beautifully golden. She could hear the neighbor's generator start up. She could hear children in the street. She picked up her phone and called Emeka. "How did it go?" he asked the moment he answered. "I told her what happened, and she told me you called her." "Are you angry that I did?" She thought about it. "No," she said. "I think I needed to hear it from her. I just needed her to own it. Come home." She went home. Months passed. Adaeze and Emeka continued their appointments. The treatment progressed. The specialist had been right. It was a matter of patience and the right intervention. Life moved forward in the way life stubbornly insists on doing, even when you've been flattened by it. The relationship with Uluaku was the hardest thing to navigate. Adaeze did not cut off her mother. She had considered it. She had weighed it seriously, in the way of a woman who takes her own pain seriously and does not perform the gesture of forgiveness for an audience. But Uluaku came to her on a Sunday without being invited, and she came without Obi and without drama, and she sat in Adaeze's parlor, and said something that stripped away the justifications and the layers and left only the raw, ugly truth. She said, "I thought you were strong enough to survive it." Adaeze stared at her. "I thought you were strong," Oluako said. "I thought you would be all right, that Obi needed this more. I used your strength as an excuse to hurt you. I know that now, and I am not asking you to forget it. I am only asking you to believe that I know what I did." It was not a perfect apology. It did not contain the word sorry even once, which Adaeze noticed, but it contained something that surprised her, the thing she had actually needed, which was acknowledgement, not performance, not theatrics, just someone who had wronged her, standing in her house and saying, "I know what I did." It was not enough to repair everything, but it was a brick, and a house can be rebuilt one brick at a time. They sat together that afternoon and drank tea and did not speak much, but the silence had changed its quality. It was no longer the silence of a thing unsaid. It was the silence of two people, beginning carefully, painfully, without any guarantee, the long work of figuring out if what had been broken could grow back.
Mama Adaeze had her own reckoning to make. Emeka had spoken to her clearly on the phone, but words on a phone are easy to survive. It was when Adaeze came with Emeka to visit, several weeks later, and Mama Adaeze opened the door and looked her daughter-in-law in the face that the real conversation happened, not in words, but in the meeting of eyes between two women who both understood perfectly what had occurred. Mama Adaeze, to her credit, did not try to pretend. She did not launch into a prepared speech or offer an elaborate explanation. She simply looked at Adaeze for a moment and then stepped aside from the door and said, "Come in, my daughter. Your food is on the stove." It was small. It was not enough by itself, but it was a beginning. Over the months that followed, as Mama Adaeze watched Adaeze move through her home with the same quiet dignity that had always characterized her, as she watched her son's face when he looked at his wife, not with the resigned contentment of a man making peace with his circumstances, but with the specific, private joy of a man exactly where he wants to be, something in Mama Adaeze settled. Some old anxiety she had been carrying like a stone in her dress pocket finally dropped away. She had almost destroyed this. She had let herself be used to destroy this. Not from malice, she would tell herself later, but from fear. Fear had made her a vehicle for someone else's scheme, and she was not proud of that. Pride, she was discovering, was a luxury that could not be afforded when you had done damage that needed undressing. She called Adaeze one evening when Emeka was at work. "I want to say something to you," she began. "Mama Adaeze said gently. "Let me finish. I was foolish. I listened to someone who had no business being listened to about your marriage, and I used what I heard to hurt you, and I almost destroyed what my son had built. I am an old woman, and I thought I knew what was best. I did not know. The best was already here, and I almost helped chase it away." Adaeze listened. "Are you angry with me?" Mama Adaeze asked. "I was," Adaeze said honestly. "I am less angry now." "Good," said Mama Adaeze, in the tone of a woman who has decided that progress, however slow, will be accepted. "Then come and visit me this weekend. Come alone. Let us talk properly, woman to woman, without the men, without the history, without all of it. Let us start again." Adaeze agreed. The twist that the entire family had not anticipated, the twist that changed the emotional architecture of this story from a tragedy into something else entirely, came on an otherwise ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Adaeze had been feeling unwell for several days, not unwell in any dramatic sense, just tired in a bone-deep cellular way,
A little nauseous in the mornings, a little sensitive to the smell of the pepper soup she usually loved. She took a test on a Wednesday afternoon, at home, alone while Emeka was at a site meeting. She sat on the edge of the bathtub and looked at the result for a very long time. Then she called her husband. "Come home," she said. "Ada, is everything?" "Everything is fine," she said. "Just come home." He must have heard something in her voice, some new quality that had not been there before, because he arrived 20 minutes later than he should have been able to, which told her he had been driving faster than he should have. He came through the door and found her standing in the middle of the sitting room, holding the test in her hand, and when he saw her face, he went very still. She held it out to him. He looked at the result. Then he looked at her. Then Adaeze, civil engineer, composed man, person who by his own admission had never cried as an adult, sat down on his own sitting room floor and put his face in his hands and wept. Adaeze sat down on the floor beside him. She put her arm around her husband. She held him there on the floor of their home that they had built together, and she let him feel everything he had been holding. The months of waiting, the fear, the conversation with his mother, the night she had told him what her mother had done, all of it. Let him feel it and release it and come through the other side. After a while, he lifted his face. He looked at her. He took her face in both his hands the way he had on their wedding day, and he said, "I need you to know something." "Tell me," she said. "Even if this had not happened, even if we had kept waiting, I need you to know that I was staying, that I was always staying, that there was never a version of this where I was not here with you." She nodded. Her eyes were bright. "I know," she said. "I always knew." The news moved through the family the way joy moves when it's real. Not a slow drip, but a sudden flood that surprised everyone it reached, including those who had no right to it. Uluako wept when Adaeze told her. She wept with the particular grief-soaked joy of a woman who understands she almost destroyed the very moment she was now being allowed to celebrate. She held her daughter and said, "Forgive me," finally said those exact words. And Adaeze held her mother, complicated, flawed, fiercely loving, desperately wrong Onuako, and let herself cry too. Obi heard the news from their eldest sister. She sent Adaeze a message that contained only 4 words. "I am truly sorry." Adaeze read it 3 times. Then she wrote back, "I know." It was not the beginning of an easy friendship. There were years of careful distance still to come, years of Obi proving in small, ordinary ways that she had become someone different than she had been in that season of jealousy and scheming. But it was a door left open. And sometimes a door left open is the most generous thing one person can offer another. Mama Eze called the moment she heard, and her voice was unrecognizable. "My daughter," and the weight she put on the word daughter, not daughter-in-law, not Emeka's wife, but daughter, was a whole apology in itself. My daughter, God is great. God is great," Adaeze agreed.
9 months later, Adaeze held her child for the first time. A boy. They named him Chizitere, meaning God has provided. And in the particular way of names in that culture, this name was not decoration. It was testimony. It was the family saying in one word, "We remember what this cost. We remember what almost happened. We remember who we were, and we are choosing to be something different." Emeka stood at the window of the hospital room holding his son with the terrified gentleness of a man holding something more precious than anything he has ever held in his life. Adaeze watched him from the bed, exhausted and whole, and quietly, deeply at peace. Her mother sat in the corner of the room, not speaking,
just present, the way a person is present when they understand that presence is all that can be asked of them now. Mama Eze arrived an hour later, and the room became full of people and noise and prayer and the particular kind of loud Igbo family joy that rolls over everything like a warm wave. Adaeze let it roll over her. She had earned this. She had fought for this in the quiet way she fought for everything, not with drama, not with performance, but with patience and love and the absolute refusal to be diminished. There is a thing about betrayal from people who love us that we rarely speak about honestly. We speak about the pain of it because the pain is loud, but we rarely speak about what comes after, what is left in a person when the wound begins to heal, what they learn about themselves, not from the betrayal, but from their own response to it. Adaeze learned that she was stronger than she had been given credit for. She had always been told she was strong, but told it in the way that made her strength an excuse to overlook her needs. She learned to receive that differently now. She learned to say, yes, I am strong, and I also need to be protected. Both things can be true. She learned that her husband was exactly who she had believed him to be. In the worst season, in the moment designed to drive him away, he had turned toward her. That was not a small thing. She would not treat it as a small thing. She learned that her mother loved her, imperfectly and damagingly, but truly, and that love and good judgment were not the same thing. You could be loved by someone whose love was capable of hurting you. Understanding that was not the same as giving up on the relationship. It was simply seeing the person clearly, all of them, including the parts that were difficult and the parts that were beautiful. She learned that forgiveness was not a feeling that arrived, it was a decision you kept making over and over in ordinary days until the decision stopped being hard. And she learned, most importantly, most quietly, that the things that are most worth having in a life are the things that survive being tested. Her marriage had been tested, her sense of self had been tested, her family had been tested, and what remained, what stood through all of it, was hers in a way it had never quite been before. Not because it had almost been taken, but because it had been chosen, again and again in the hardest moments by everyone who truly mattered. Chizitere grew up knowing his name had a story. He didn't know all of it. Children don't need to carry the weight of adult failure, but he knew that his parents had waited for him, that he had been hoped for, that the house he grew up in was a house that had been through something and come through it. And he knew that his grandmother, Uloku, who came every Sunday and held him like he was the most important thing in the world, looked at him sometimes with eyes that held something complicated, something that looked a little like gratitude and a little like apology and a little like the particular joy of a person who has been given, against all odds, a second chance to love someone right. If this story hit you somewhere real, you already know why. Because the hardest betrayals aren't the ones from people we barely know. They are the ones from the people who were supposed to be safe, the people who carried us, raised us, called us family. And what Adaeze did in the face of that, the decision not to become bitter, not to let the wound define her, not to stop loving even when love had cost her so much, that is the hardest, quietest kind of strength there is. If you are watching this and you are in the middle of something like this, a betrayal that came from where it shouldn't have, I want you to know that what comes after can be more beautiful than what came before. Not because the wound disappears, but because you discover what you are made of. And sometimes what you are made of surprises you. If this channel is new to you, subscribe. I tell stories like this every week. Real, human, complicated stories about love and betrayal and the things families do to each other and to themselves. Stories that stay with you. Hit the bell so you never miss one. And to Adaeze, wherever you are, in whatever version of this story is real and living and breathing, this one was for you.